Welcome to Newsday. I'm Babita Sharma in London. The headlines. His final big speech as president, Barack Obama heads to Chicago for his farewell address. Jeff Sessions, the man picked to be the next U.S. Attorney General, has told a congressional hearing that he's no racist and that he's never supported the Ku Klux Klan.
I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore. FIFA approves plans for a massive expansion of football's World Cup to 48 teams. And the woman who sat on the front row of history, British war correspondent Claire Hollingworth, has died at the age of 105.
Live from our studios in London and Singapore. This is BBC World News. It's Newsday.
Welcome to the programme. It's 6 a.m. in Singapore, 11 p.m. here in London, and 5 p.m. in Chicago, where Barack Obama will deliver the final big speech of his presidency. It's expected to be a parting plea to Americans not to lose faith in their future, no matter what they think about their next president. It's also his last chance to try to define his legacy. The president boarded Air Force One at the Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland a short while ago, bound for Chicago, a fitting bookend to what began 8 years ago in the city where the nation's first black president claimed his victory. Our correspondent Laura Trevelyan is in Chicago for us. Laura, over to you.
Well, Babita, the crowds are flooding into this lakeside convention centre, all eager to hear what President Obama has to say just about 3 hours from now. And this is where it all began for him here in Chicago as a community organiser. This is where, as you were saying, in 2008, he declared victory. And this is where he's coming tonight to offer his parting thoughts. Now, many loyal fans are coming tonight to hear him speak. And amongst them is Aretha Glasper, who, as you can see, is extremely well dressed.
Thank you very much.
So, Aretha, what are you hoping to hear from the president tonight?
I am hoping that the president will give us hope to carry on. I know that he will squash some of the fear that America has about the President-elect Trump. I know that he's gracious enough to offer his help going forward. So I'm sure that President Obama will continue his class act and offer his help, assistance, and try to ease the fears of the American people.
Now, you were there in Grant Park in 2008. You heard Barack Obama declare victory when he was first elected president.
Yes.
What does it mean to you to be here tonight to hear his parting words?
The farewell speech is important because it represents me backing him from the beginning until the end. And even though it is a farewell speech, it saddens me somewhat, but it was something that's needed. He had a great 2 terms, 8 years. He took the high road during the entire time. He made us proud as African Americans. He was a president for all of the people, and I think that he stuck to that.
This is a difficult moment, though, isn't it, for Democrats after a divisive election? President-elect Donald Trump is highly unpopular with supporters of the president. How do you hope Barack Obama can navigate a course forward for you?
I am hoping that first that President-elect Trump will do the right thing for the people. I know that he's unpopular, but I'm not really concerned so much. Once you have a good start, I think there are some things that President Trump will see is important to keep. Some of the things that President Obama put in place, I think that he will continue. And I know that he'll have to change some things because that's what he said he would do. But I think he'll see the light.
Aretha Glasper, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So that's the view of one very well-dressed Obama supporter here in the crowd at the Lakeside Convention Centre. And Barack Obama, his aides say, aims to deliver a speech that is beyond politics. He's going to reflect on his 8 years in office and also offer some pointers on the way ahead. And he said in a video released ahead of this speech, he's learnt 2 things in his 8 years. One is that the American people are so good, and secondly, that change can happen. Back to you.
Indeed, Laura, thank you very much. Much more from Laura and his team there in Chicago throughout the coming hours. Later in the programme, of course, we'll be looking more at this, at Barack Obama's foreign policy legacy. And, of course, you can watch live coverage of President Obama's final farewell speech. That's at 0200 GMT. Join us for that.
Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. Senate have clashed over the confirmation of Donald Trump's nominee for Attorney General. Republican senators described Jeff Sessions as a distinguished legislator, but Democrats said they were troubled by what they called his extremely conservative agenda. Several times he rejected allegations of racism. Barbara Platt-Usher has more from Washington.
This was always going to be a hard sell. A senator dogged for years by allegations of racism, now set to become the country's top law enforcement official. Jeff Sessions is the first of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees to be questioned by Congress, and the most controversial.
I am not a racist. I am not insensitive to blacks.
30 years ago, he was accused of racist comments in front of this same committee. It rejected him for a position as federal judge. Other charges of civil rights violations followed. He's been defending his record ever since.
I'm from South Carolina, so I know.
A fellow senator from the South gave him a chance to humanize the debate.
When I came up as a United States attorney, I had no real support group. I didn't prepare myself well in 1986, and there was an organized effort to caricature me as something that wasn't true.
Sessions strongly denied allegations that he supported the Ku Klux Klan and said he had no doubt about systemic discrimination.
I know that was wrong. I know we need to do better. We can never go back.
The civil rights concerns tapped into wider fears of what a Trump administration will bring, especially from a strong Trump supporter like Sessions.
Communities across this country are concerned about whether they will be able to rely on the Department of Justice to protect their rights and freedoms.
Democratic senators quizzed Sessions about his hardline views on immigration and social issues. Could he enforce laws he'd voted against? Yes, he said, including same-sex marriage and abortion.
It is the law of the land. It has been so established and settled for quite a long time, and it deserves respect, and I would respect it and follow it.
He also sought to ease fears that he supported Trump's initial call for a ban on Muslims entering the country. But reassuring testimony has limited impact in this climate. A number of black lawmakers even plan to testify against their fellow congressmen, something almost unheard of.
Please understand, I think these are extraordinary times and they call for extraordinary measures.
Barbara Platt-Usher, BBC News, Washington.
Also making news today, dozens of people have been killed in a succession of militant attacks in Afghanistan. The Taliban said it was responsible for the twin bomb attacks on an intelligence agency vehicle in the center of Kabul. Well, the car was responding to a blast minutes earlier. A jury in South Carolina has confirmed that Dylan Roof will get the death penalty for killing 9 black men and women at a church in 2015. The 22-year-old white supremacist was convicted of the crimes last year. Several days of torrential rain in Thailand has left at least 30 people dead. The heaviest January rains for 3 decades have been lashing the country south for more than a week, affecting more than 1 million people across 12 provinces. Now take a look at this. Doctors at a hospital in China have used lights from smartphones to deliver a baby in the dark. Well, a woman went into labor in the back of a car outside a hospital in Guangzhou, and doctors said that by the time they reached the car, half of the baby's body was already in view, so they had to deliver the baby there.
Football's governing body, FIFA, has approved plans to expand the World Cup to 48 teams. It'll open up the tournament to nations who've previously found it difficult to qualify. It's set to boost the number of African and Asian countries that are taking part. The move will also generate millions more from advertising and TV rights. Our sports correspondent Richard Conway reports from Zurich.
FIFA has finally cleared a path to a World Cup of 48 teams. From 2026, 16 more countries will join football's flagship tournament.
We're all set up.
Speaking to me today, the world governing body's president insisted, in the face of much criticism, it's time for the sport to look beyond its traditional borders.
Football has now become a truly global game because many more countries, many more teams will have the chance to qualify. So they will invest in developing football, they will invest in developing elite football as well as grassroots football. They will invest in their technical developments, and this will make sure that the quality raises.
The growth of the World Cup will bring enormous extra revenue. FIFA stand to make an additional £500 million in profit in 2026, according to its own research. But the man elected as FIFA president, partly on a pledge to deliver a bigger competition, insists it's not about cash or politics.
Well, it's not at all a money and power grab. It's actually the opposite. It's a football decision. So the way we presented it was, okay, we presented 4 formats. Every one of the 4 formats has advantages in terms of the financial situation, which means that we are in a comfortable situation to be able to take a decision simply based on the sporting merit.
Asia, where interest in football is booming, and Africa stand to benefit the most when the extra 16 places are divided up. There will be more slots too for European nations. The Scottish FA welcomed today's decision, believing it will give them and others a better chance at qualifying. After a number of years when FIFA was a byword for corruption, its new leadership is determined to assert itself. Gianni Infantino's task is now to convince his critics a reformed World Cup is a force for good. Richard Conway, BBC News, Zurich.
Not often that Malaysia gets to celebrate a world-class victory in football, but on Monday, Modfaz Subri beat some of the finest players in the world to be named winner of the FIFA Puskas Award for the scoring of the best goal of 2016. A massive triumph for the young player, but what has really caught the world's attention is his rather charming attempts to get his acceptance speech notes out of his phone. As you can see here, it took him a minute or two. That clip has now gone viral and eventually upstaged everyone else at the ceremony.
Do you need any help? Maybe.
Claire Hollingworth, the journalist who broke the news of the start of the Second World War, has died at the age of 105. She was just 27 when she delivered the scoop of the century on the buildup of German troops on the Polish border. She went on to cover many of the most significant events of the 20th century. James Robbins looks back at her life and career.
This is the national program from London. Germany has invaded Poland and has bombed many towns.
But 3 days earlier, Claire Hollingworth's greatest scoop had already appeared in the Daily Telegraph. Alone inside Germany, she'd seen the Nazis massing for invasion. Aged 27 and a journalist for less than a week, a woman in a man's world had beaten the lot of them.
1939, I went out to Poland to become number 2 to Hugh Carlton Green of BBC fame, and I got to Warsaw, and he said, one of us has got to go to the frontier, and I was on the German-Polish frontier when the German hordes, tanks, moved in.
Mr. Harold Philby on the
And Claire Hollingworth's scoops kept coming. In 1963, she uncovered Kim Philby's escape to Russia as an MI6 traitor. For weeks, The Guardian refused to publish, fearing a libel action. But above all, she was a war correspondent across the Middle East and notably in Vietnam, revealing secret talks between Hanoi and Washington.
I'm really passionately interested in war, and if one is passionately interested in war, one can't help like being in it. Happy birthday, dear Claire.
Last year in Hong Kong, fellow journalists celebrated Claire's 105th birthday, as even more extraordinary stories emerged of her role before World War II, helping refugees escape the Nazis. In danger herself so many times, Claire Hollingworth was witness to great events across more than a century.
Claire Hollingworth, who's died at the age of 105. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the program. With just hours to go before his farewell speech as president, we look at the impact of his foreign policy in East Asia.
The Japanese people are in mourning following the death of Emperor Hirohito. Thousands converged on the Imperial Palace to pay their respects when it was announced he was dead.
Good grief. After half a century of delighting fans around the world, Charlie Brown and the rest of the gang are calling it quits.
The singer Paul Simon starts his tour of South Africa tomorrow in spite of protests and violence from some black activist groups. They say international artists should continue to boycott South Africa until majority rule is established.
Teams were trying to scoop up lumps of oil as France recognises it faces an ecological crisis. 3 weeks ago, the authorities confidently assured these areas that oil from the broken tanker Erika would head out to sea. It didn't.
The world's tallest skyscraper opens later today. The Burj Dubai has easily overtaken its nearest rivals.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. I'm Rico Hizon in Singapore.
Yes, thanks for joining us. I'm Babita Sharma in London. Our top stories. President Barack Obama takes off for Chicago to make his final farewell address at the McCormick Convention Center.
Donald Trump's controversial nomination for the post of Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions, has been defending his record as he testifies at a confirmation hearing. Volkswagen says it has agreed to a $4.3 billion draft settlement with U.S. authorities over the emissions rigging scandal. The German carmaker said its proposal would settle criminal and civil fines. It also said it would plead guilty to breaking certain U.S. laws.
Let's take a look at the front pages from around the world making the headlines for Wednesday. And China Daily talks about Alibaba's ambitious plans for America. The paper says the e-commerce giant is going to add American companies to its vast network, creating 1 million new jobs in America. This is the Philippine Star this morning reporting on the latest pirate atrocity in the country. 8 fishermen have been killed in an attack off the southern coast of Mindanao. And the South China Morning Post this morning has got a picture of Jia Jia, the Chinese robot. Here she is. The most human-looking robot. She is on her way to a presentation about the digital economy in Shanghai. That's the way the papers are. Rico, what's happening online?
Well, what's trending is the Earth's core, Babita. And Japanese scientists think they discovered the identity of the missing element within the core of the Earth. As well as iron and nickel, researchers now think that silicon is also present, making up about 5% of the core's weight.
As President Obama makes his farewell address in Chicago, he's expected to highlight his achievements abroad, the nuclear deal with Iran and the capture of Osama bin Laden. But he may be less forthcoming about the conflict in Syria and the rise of the so-called Islamic State, and of course deteriorating relations with Russia. So what is the Obama foreign policy legacy all about? Here's our North America editor, John Sopel.
There was always something upside down about Barack Obama receiving the Nobel Peace Prize before he'd really done anything as president. When he came to office, one of the greatest strategic threats was Iran, a resurgent power in the region. But more important than that was securing a multinational deal to curb Tehran's nuclear ambitions. An agreement struck despite fierce opposition from Israel's Prime Minister.
When Benjamin Netanyahu came to address the Congress nearly 2 years ago, there was fury in the White House. They were angry that an invitation had been extended by Republican leaders and accepted without the president knowing. But very soon, someone much more to the Israeli Prime Minister's liking will be occupying the White House. And the question the world is asking, will the Iran nuclear deal survive the change of power?
For over a year, we've been told that no deal is better than a bad deal. Well, this is a bad deal. It's a very bad deal.
His relationship with Netanyahu was one of the lows, culminating in the US refusing to veto a UN resolution critical of Israel's policy of settlement building. The chemistry with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin was no better. Crimea, cyber espionage and Syria left them barely speaking. The pledge at the start of his presidency was all about disengaging from costly conflicts and bringing the troops back home.
We can say to those families who have lost loved ones to al-Qaeda's terror, justice has been done.
But the optimism brought by the successful raid to kill Osama bin Laden in 2011 and the spread of the Arab Spring would eventually be replaced by a Middle East in flames and the rise of so-called Islamic State, the fight against which remains unfinished business. Arguably, the low point for President Obama in the Middle East has been Syria, which has been a humanitarian catastrophe, sparking the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And the president's failure to act against President Assad, despite much huffing and puffing, has come back to haunt him.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus.
But nothing happened. No action.
I think it was a mistake not to enforce the red line. When the United States says very clearly that there will be costs and consequences for a certain action, I think it's important to follow up on that action. But I also wouldn't confuse that, enforcing the chemical weapons red line, with the notion that there was some interventionist fix to the Syria problem.
Barack Obama's policy towards Syria is very much like the country's embassy here in Washington, D.C. An empty shell, newspapers piling up on the doorstep, the windows barred. And in the talks to bring peace to the country, America isn't at the table. Barack Obama has flip-flopped over whether to take military action, too slow to react to the dangers of so-called Islamic State. It's been a period in which American influence has waned and Russian has increased. From one empty embassy to another that has had new life breathed into it. This is the Cuban embassy in northwest Washington. For over 50 years, it had lain derelict, a last legacy, if you like, of the Cold War. In the warmth of a Caribbean island, Barack Obama consigned the last piece of icy Cold War legacy to history. Cuba had brought the world to the edge of nuclear war. Now diplomatic relations are restored, an extraordinary transformation. He leaves office largely admired and popular around the world, not least for his role in the global climate change deal. He tried to carve out a foreign policy that he saw as right for the times. But as the Commander-in-Chief was given the traditional send-off, in his own way, was he as destructive to US power and influence as his predecessor, George W. Bush? And what would the Nobel Committee make of him 8 years on? John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
To discuss about Barack Obama's foreign policy legacy here in Asia, we're joined by Chris Leahy, the founder of Black Peak, a strategic advisory firm focused on Asia. Mr. Leahy, great to have you with us. A lot of hype and hope when the Asia Pivot was launched in 2010. Did President Obama succeed?
No, not in a word. It was like much of Obama's foreign policy, long on vision, short on execution. I think in his defense, he had far more pressing foreign policy considerations in Syria, in the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, and issues at home. But if you look at actually what happened, what was a manifestation of the so-called Asia Pivot, really, the only physical manifestation of that was the vaunted TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which actually hasn't really happened.
And some critics are saying it wasn't really an Asia pivot. We saw a China pivot. I mean, under his watch, we saw man-made islands built by the Chinese on the South China Sea, the disputed South China Sea islands.
Exactly, and I think this is exactly what happened while the United States was looking in the other direction, internally to a certain extent, certainly in the Middle East and other fiscal, economic problems. The Chinese government under Xi Jinping quite cleverly saw its opportunity to assert more of its authority in the region and launched its 9-dash policy, the claim to the South China Sea and what have you. And
you mentioned about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If this materialized, could the Asia Pivot have been different?
Possibly, I think, yes, if we were transitioning into a Clinton administration, which we're not. The TPP, by anybody's reckoning, is dead. It's not going to happen. It needs the ratification of some 18 countries. That was going to be a tall order, even with a favourable administration. And Trump, President-elect Trump, has made it very clear that he intends to tear it up.
And you mentioned about President-elect Donald Trump, a lot of concerns in Asia of what is to come.
Indeed, I think that's the case globally. But I think one of the most concerning things about the new presidency is just nobody knows what's going to happen, what kind of president he's going to become. He made change on immigration to be someone a little bit more reasonable, a little bit more diplomatic. The early evidence is he's not. In Asia, the Asia-Pacific markets and economies have really prospered over the last 40 years because of the presence of a very delicate balance of power between the United States and China. And that balance is no longer there. It's more shifted in favour of the Chinese, of the People's Republic of China.
And we'll have to wait and see how this will all play out. U.S.-China relations, U.S.-Asia relations in 2017 under a Trump administration. Chris Leahy from Blackpeak, a strategic advisory firm based in Asia. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been watching Newsday. I'm Rico Hizon.
And I'm Babita Sharma here in London. We're just going to show you the pictures live in America. This is the city of Chicago, where Air Force One has touched down, carrying, of course, the President Barack Obama as he prepares to make his farewell address in a few hours from now. More on that to come. Stay with us.
Hi there, we've still got our very cold air with us across eastern parts of Europe, but gradually it's going to turn a little bit less cold night by night. Snow across Bulgaria overnight will push into Romania. There is a chance of seeing some transport disruption here. 10 to 20 centimetres of snow. And generally temperatures overnight -8 to -12 degrees fairly widely. Frost-free across Western Europe. Now looking at the picture through Wednesday, a weather system pushes into the northwest of Europe. This will bring a spell of snow, which will then turn back to rain across Denmark and parts of Germany. Further south, we've got the snowfall in Romania. That snow is going to be quite heavy, but will peter off gradually as we go through Wednesday afternoon. Looking at the picture in Greece, here's a mixed bag. We'll see rain towards coastal areas, bit of snow for the higher ground in the eastern Peloponnese. And across western Turkey, it's turned much milder, temperatures into double figures. So we are going to see rain moving in here and, of course, a thawing and melting of any snow that's on the ground. Here's the picture through Thursday. Colder air filtering in across the United Kingdom, the northwest of Europe generally, bringing lower temperatures. And there will be some snow showers pushing in, particularly across Scotland and also Norway and Sweden, seeing some of those as well. Here's the picture for the next few days. Colder air works in across London and Paris, dropping the temperatures. We're looking at highs of 5 degrees in Paris by Friday, so a good deal cooler than it has been over recent days. But it's not as cold in Moscow. Temperatures -2 by Friday with some snow flurries.
It's one of those curious things.